Superintendent Maryann O'Donnell proposes the 2019-20 Clinton Education budget to the Board of Education on Monday, January 28, 2019.
The budget objects report, I gave you a fancy color-coded one tonight to reference highlight the areas of the objects that are increasing and decreasing, and I'll reference that, so I wanted you to have that. And then lastly, the draft proposed budget worksheet. And this is still, this represents where I am presenting my budget right now tonight, and this is what the presentation will try and summarize and the details here. So it has shifted it a little over the last couple of weeks, even compared to last week when we held our subcommittee meeting. This is where I'm at and what I'm presenting, and it's what I'll talk about in my PowerPoint. So as I go through the presentation, I'll reference a couple of these documents. In particular, the objects one is probably a good one rather than looking through all the different line items again of the individuals. Okay? And then the strategic plan I'll reference, but that's really for your reference. And the tuitions page you might want to reference when I talk about that object. Okay? And then you have my PowerPoint in front of you so you can follow along or jot some notes if you want. Okay? All right. So let's jump in. And we'll start, as we always do, with our mission. We are here to empower learners to embrace and influence the future with courage and compassion. And that really guides all of the work. You've heard that through the cost center presentations. It really is the anchor to the work that we're doing and drives all of our strategic planning work. Next is our listed strategic priorities, and that strategic plan document takes each one of those and outlines over the next 3 years what we're focusing on in terms of specific goals and initiatives related to those. And that plan, as you recall, is the culmination of 2 years probably of work in trying to identify what are the needs in the district, what is our current state, and then setting the future in a 3-year module. So really, as we went into this budgeting, there are a lot of moving pieces. Our goal was to implement this strategic plan. It was to make sure we're clearly supporting our instruction and academic achievement needs for our students, that we knew we would be investing in curriculum materials and a curriculum development process, prioritizing our student experiences that were important to us here in Clinton, and then the big picture of addressing our district reorganization. So all of these pieces were coming into play in our budget development process. So I want to take a second, we're going to move quickly through these, but ultimately when we do this, when you live it with us every day, it truly is about these core things. It's about our classrooms and the amazing things that are happening between our high quality staff and the children that are there that they work with every day. And that gets to our learners and what it's like for them, the experiences, the equipment, materials, opportunities that our learners have in all of our buildings here in the district. In addition to our classroom experiences, there are those things that are just part of who we are in Clinton. And remembering what's important to us, even as we grow, change, reorganize, but sticking to our core of what's important to us, what's been told to us by our parents, our community, our staff, our administrators, and most importantly, our students, what they help you. What makes Clinton really special is our community. We have amazing connections from the time Students Enter Joel, and we're coming up on our 100th-day celebration, Monster Mash, things that are just part of who we are and how we connect and reach out to our community and broader Clinton experiences. And so these are just a few things to remind us that a lot of what, it might be small dollars, but it's part of who we are and what our school culture and our community culture is about. And then finally, to remind all of our student achievement and what makes Clinton really, truly great. And notice in all of those pictures, it's our students. Okay. Now that I've set the tone about what's really important and what these numbers mean. This year, obviously, is a little different in the way that we approached our budget construction. Two big things, the yellow and the orange, were happening for us that aren't normal in a budget year cycle. So in August, usually we do district goals, but in August, it was the culmination of a formal adoption of our strategic plan that outlined the work and the charge for our administrators, our teachers, and the school district as a whole. Following that, we also had our facilities committee work, and that decision in November, where there was a decision made to close Pierson School, to create the timeline for the 1920 school year and reorganize our elementary, lower elementary, and our middle school. That's a daunting task. It was a decision that was finally made in November, and while there was some precursor work to do, it really did impact the normal cycle of budget development and what we needed to do and include in the budget. Next, killing me. Next is the cost center budget development. That always happens. We usually start that in October. In fact, we probably start it in September. If we're at certain schools, our administrators begin the process. And yet that was kind of held up a little bit this year because of the other big decisions that were happening. We couldn't make many of the budget determinations because of the changes that were happening. And then finally, our district reorganization planning. And as we heard, there are some big decisions being made that impact budget. We are able to put this budget forth knowing that the final decisions about things will support what's in this budget. This budget will support those final decisions. But there's still work being happening around that. So all of those things influence what we're here to talk about tonight, which is the operations budget. And there are three components to our budget: our capital budget, which was submitted in the fall. We did all that work through the summer. The debt reduction, which is given to us from the town, and then the operations budget. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit in our operations budget and try to give some context, and then hopefully again we can answer questions, and it will be a little more understandable some of the key components that make up this budget proposal that's here in front of you. So I've mentioned this a little bit. Normally we talk about our budget drivers, and this year it was a little different. We had to talk about what are the major considerations in this budget. Strategic plan by far was a top and center. That's the work that we do, that's the work of the board and the administration and the staff. And so what we laid out had to be represented in this budget. In addition, we knew we were doing a reorganization, and that made us have to look carefully at what the program needs are for our students. Closing of Pierson has lots of facets we'll talk about tonight. And then the last piece is health insurance. And while that's always a topic, a budget principle, there's some information about our decision-making around health insurance that we'll share tonight as well. So those were kind of four things that we're all factoring in. So the strategic plan I've mentioned, I won't belabor it, but I think key in that was implications for this budget had to do in particular around some investment in curriculum development, writing, as well as some math programming. That's been identified as an area in need of some focus. We've taken the last 2.5 years to look at that, and so this budget does represent some materials related to implementation of new math programs. The district reorganization, many of you who are here tonight have been very much embedded in that. We needed to rediscover the program needs related to a pre-K-4 elementary and a 5-8 middle school, teaming structures, staffing needs, and then really critical was our related arts programming, both enhancements that we could potentially provide, as well as some adjustments, and then determining the staff needs to do that and what we really needed in a district reorganization. Closing of Pierson. One of the most important pieces related to budget development was making determinations about what the transition costs were going to be to close a school and open a school and close out of the building, because there's components there. We had to consider what was needed to move, to redesign our programming and shift things, and then how could we realize cost savings as well as redistribute some costs as the students moved into the other buildings. So the next two slides, so there's lots of detail behind this. The next two slides try to give an overview and a reference point for the board in terms of these transition costs and cost savings at Pierson. So one of the important things is, as we looked at our new program design, what does it look like for investments in making the transition happen? And there was lots of talk in the initial conversation around closing Pierson and what it would take to allow, the move of grades. And some of the decision-making and discussion occurred within that Clinton Facilities Committee. CCC.
Just say CCC.
FN. And that committee had some conversation around what was really needed, and we looked at it from a maintenance perspective, from an organizational perspective, and how we could redistribute. But we did identify some transition costs as we started to develop our programming needs and looking at schedules and how it would work. So this slide just briefly identifies what we anticipate to be transition costs and the way that we think we're going to handle it. So the first four on the slide, we believe at this point that we can pay for that out of our 18-19 operating budget. So our current budget, that we have kind of tightened some things and looked for ways that we can apply some of the current operating money to address these things and not have to have a new request or have this offset what we can realize in savings. And so this is just listed here. The last two were put into our capital request in the fall, and so this is part of our current capital request. I will point out that Elliott Network wiring and switch upgrade was something we needed to do. The fact that we are now moving a 5th grade into the school makes it a mandatory transition cost. We cannot move 5th grade in and still have the technology use that we want without doing this project. So it's already been bumped 1 year. It's a critical project this year that absolutely has to happen. But right now it is in our capital proposal. The playground piece, we're still working through that. We have a number of needs there, as well as just some upgrades to the Joel playground. We think with the number that's there, we can do whatever we need to make the playground ready for our students here at Joel. So after transition costs, the second piece is cost savings. And as I've kind of talked to the board about, I have that detailed redistribution of where we have savings and where costs were redistributed. So although we have staff we have students moving to 2 different schools, the staff basically needs to go with them. But where we could realize efficiencies, we wanted to do that. When we did our committee initially, when I presented, we had a very conservative estimate of somewhere around $500,000 in costs. We have looked very, very carefully as we developed our redesign, what our needs were there and where we could reduce, not just personnel, but also operational, supplies, all sorts of things. So this is a very short synopsis to fit on the slide of what we are projecting in our savings in closing of Pierson. And you can see the different categories, and as I mentioned, there is the detail behind it, so I can share with the board what that looks like in terms of what is being redistributed in terms of staffing and other supply needs at the schools. So those are 3 of the things. The 4th thing that I said was kind of more difficult in realizing this budget was health insurance. And this continues to be one of the major drivers of the budget. This continues to be an area that the board, as well as myself and Mrs. Dickey and the business office, continue to look at how we can contain costs. A year ago in the spring, we had some conversation with the board, made the decision to explore some other alternatives. Right now, we're currently in this health collaborative, but we felt like we needed to do some due diligence and take a look at alternatives, look at cost savings, and any financial implications to that. But to make this change does involve engagement with our various contractual unions and components. And so we are in that process. We've been in that process since June. We're hopeful that there are some potential for significant reduction in the budgeted costs for health insurance. You'll see that right now. I have to budget where we are and in our current state, but that's still a moving piece even as I present tonight. Okay? So let's jump into the actual numbers, and you've seen this number on the sheets I provided. So the proposed budget that I'm sharing with you tonight is listed here. Right now, we're looking at an increase of $605,452, or a 1.85% increase. So we're going to go to the next slide because there are many, including myself and others, to say, how does this fit together? We're closing a school, we have savings, I showed you a big number in savings, so how does this make sense in the big picture to get where I am now with an increase? So here's really how we do it, and I'm going to show you on the next two slides. So if we took the current year's budget, and all we did with our current staffing, right, because while we're moving students, our staff's moving. If everything stayed the same and we increased the salary cost according to contractual obligations, then we increase our health insurance cost based on what our renewal rate is for that staff. Then we add the new strategic plan programs and curricular implementation costs. Take all of the savings out that we've been able to realize and subtract the net savings of other line items where we're constantly trying to adjust it. We get to the final budget. So let me illustrate it for you on the next slide. So by doing that, that's the process that we did. The salary increases with current staff as it is, no changes, would be $750,186. Okay, that's just taking everybody contractual changes as we go into 1920. The employee benefits cost increases is listed there. And then as I shared with the board what's new in this budget, we looked at that last week. That's the total amount that deals with our math curriculum implementation. It deals with some of the new items, and you'll see that a little later in the budget. That puts us in accomplishing our strategic plan, and just staying where we are, rolling it up, would put us tonight presenting to you, if I didn't have other cost savings, a 4.56% increase, or $1.4 million. So now let's look at all of the pieces that we've done. If you take the number of reductions from the Pearson closing, and then you take all the other line items, and we'll talk about a few tonight, everything else that we've been able to contain or pull or be more efficient or go out to bid and save, there's another $48,150, which gets us to basically where I am tonight, which is the $605,000. So a normal budget, last year when we started this, we were at 4.5. We brought it, I think when I presented it was at 3.62, and then we went through a process. So the driving costs are around our employee benefits and our salaries. And that is always our major drivers, and then there's always a couple other lines. So we need to continue to contain those salary costs with, fair but diligent negotiations, as well as looking at health costs, because those continue to drive the increases in our budgets. So that's kind of how we got there to this amount, despite the fact that we're closing the school and we're saving. So I think the next few slides, what I'd like to do is to go through, there's so many moving pieces in this budget that being able to compare last year to this year and explain and do the one-to-one is much more difficult in this budget. So I'm going to try to look at it, I think, through a lens of a more macro level. And instead of going into every line item and saying this line item, what I'd like to do is do it from the objects. Because the objects represent some big increases, some big decreases. These objects reflect the reductions from Pearson, the reallocation of staffing, some additional reductions that exist in the budget. And so I'm going to use this as an anchor, because I think some of your questions about why is this or why is that really can be answered through the object one. Probably won't answer all of them, but I think it will hit the bigger ones and give a good overview. So if you go, this slide just shows the way that the objects are laid out, and the fact that the proposed budget by object, you can see the two biggest ones there are our salaries and our benefits, right? And according to our object page that I've shared that has the pink and yellow on it, 80% of our budget is salaries and benefits. We're a people-driven organization. We provide those other key resources that our students need, but it really is about our people working directly with our students. So I'm going to take you through the object accounts, and we're going to start with our areas of increase. And again, as you hit the next slide, our areas of increase really, you can see benefits, salaries, and then every other account. Okay, and keep in mind that benefit number, because if some of what we're trying to do in insurance, that benefit number is going to change quite a bit, which changes this whole reality of our increase. Okay. So in pink, on your object report, this is where, these are the major increases. There are some small increases here and there, but these are the major ones that are driving our increase in the budget. And they're offset by some decreases, so I'm gonna focus on these. And the first two are highlighted because as I emphasized, those are two of the major areas where we have increase in this budget. So overall, the certified salaries represent this number. It takes all of the contractual increases for our teachers and administrators who are certified staff, but it does include 4 reductions. 1 full-time administrator and 3 full-time classroom teaching positions. The second object, this is the employee benefits object. I'm going to show you a couple of slides with some detail on this, but notice the overall increase in the object is 6.29%, right? That's not just due to health insurance, but the 2 major increases in this object that's made up of multiple lines is health insurance and the non-certified pension had a bit of an increase this year from last year. So the next slide takes each of the line items. So if you go into the budget, you can find these specific line items and these numbers in the amount change column. All of this together makes the employee benefits object. So when it shows employee benefits going up $429,045, math all works. These are the objects, and you can see the biggest increase and the one that the board is actively trying to mitigate, and hopefully will have some answers in the near future, is the employee medical, which we think we may be able to mitigate completely if things work out. So we definitely, if we can move forward with some of the plans, we can reduce that amount, and we'll see what we can do. We should have those answers in the next month or 2. So I did want to include this slide in here. I told you a little bit about health insurance. If we don't make a change, this is where we're at. So we're looking at a 14% renewal increase. Despite, and that's mitigated a little bit by the fact that we have negotiated into 2 new contracts for next year, a change to a high deductible plan, which is a less expensive plan. So that is mitigating the 14% renewal. We also have some reduction in employees, as you'll see throughout. We're doing, again, in the reorganization, we're thoughtfully looking at what we need and are we staffed appropriately. That's always a question we ask. And so we do have some reduction in employees, which also helps mitigate the increase. And I added a bullet, just there is potential for some negotiated savings. So the next pink one, right underneath the employee benefits subtotal, is professional and technical services. So this object is made up of these key things, and I included the cost center because the cost centers are numbered in your packet and you can reference it later. Cost center 5 is our special services cost center, and professional services for the handicap are services. It includes some employees, it includes some contracted components, mostly contracted components that provide services for our students in district. And ultimately, the reason that increase exists is we are making some moves in our grant. And one of you asked a question, and I did provide kind of a chart that's color-coded to show that while we're moving some money out of the grant into the regular budget, we're also moving some money from the regular budget into the grant. So it's almost an offset. And the reason we're doing that is there's a new opportunity that Mrs. Dickey and Mrs. Enoch have taken advantage of. Kind of the state created the opportunity and we're moving forward with, which is to get reimbursement for services that are applicable under Medicaid. And you guys have heard about that. We have been able to get reimbursement up to this point. We started about April or May, getting fully underway. And so we are getting that reimbursement that goes back to the town as a revenue. By moving certain people, if they're in the grant, you can't claim that reimbursement. And so by moving certain people out of being paid in the grant into the regular budget, we can now claim reimbursement and hopefully increase the amount of revenue that comes back to the town. To us, that offsets, what we're asking for here. The problem is, it looks like, okay, how's that happening? So it's harder to track. I did provide a chart to try to show you who's moving in and who's moving out. But that increase in that one line is really because we moved that portion of those contracted services out, and then we moved something else in, okay? So that's why it says grant adjustments, and the whole point of this, it would be easier to leave everybody where it is and not have an increase appear here, but the whole point is to increase the revenue amount in reimbursement to the town. The second one that I've had some questions about, every other year, there are actuarial requirements, including GASB, that we need to contract with our actuarial provider, Milliman, and so this is their quote of, in next year's, this is what it's basically going to cost. Most of this increase is due to that. There's a little bit increase in their overall cost, just as on an annual basis, but that's what that one's for. We've talked a lot about curriculum development, and then there's a small amount in the PD and training lines in each of the cost centers where we had cut in the past, and so that small differential is what makes up the rest of that amount. Transportation is another one. The object represents these four line items, and yet they're in different cost centers. One's in special ed, one's in district-wide, one's going up, one's going down. It would be easier to have all one line item, or easier to have it all in one place, or just leave it alone. Because the net of the first two lines is simply what we have to charge. So one bus now is not being used for special ed services in town, it's being used for regular ed services in town, and so we have to charge it that way here. Again, it gets to reimbursement and excess cost and all sorts of things in state reporting. So if it's a special ed service, we have to report it to the state in a different way than if it's regular ed. So we have to make these moves based on what we actually have with our routes. I will point out, we did do the new contract last year, and in that new contract, we also pushed with reducing buses, and we were able to do that. So this year, we have somewhat of a cost savings in this year's contract, which then mitigates the overall 3% increase in transportation. So we did have a 3% increase, but overall, regular transportation hasn't changed. What you see here, this object is increasing primarily because of the special ed out-of-town transportation, which really represents, we have an increase, I'll share in a minute, of one additional student outplaced, but we also have another student. So it's really the increase partially this year and next year with our special ed transportation, which we're required. So then the next one is our textbooks object, and that's the last of the pink of the increase, the large increase, and we talked a lot about this. So these are our curriculum implementation pieces, and then the high school textbooks is something that we've had on the table. It's an online civics book, and it's found in the textbook line. Oh, I skipped it, it's out of order, I'm sorry. So it's the second to last pink one. My slides are not in order. This is your tuition object. I talked a little bit about this one. So the BOAG magnet tuition line is in district-wide. Students may choose to move or to apply to attend a magnet school or the BOAG school in Middletown if they're interested in those programs. And if students choose to do that and they're accepted, then the districts are required to pay for a certain amount of tuition that's either, it's set by the school and according to state guidelines. So this has been a very high line over time in our budget, and yet it continues to come down a little bit. We're down a little bit in the BOAG magnet tuition because the costs of our anticipated students out are down just a little bit. We have seen over the past several years that more and more students are staying in district and not attending, and so we've been able to bring that number down. And this is primarily at the high school level, but it's not just at the high school level. There are other magnets that kids can attend. If they attend some of the magnet schools in New Haven that we have a cooperation agreement with, it doesn't cost us anything. But there are a lot of additional magnets, and that's why I did pass out this page, and it's always in the budget book. But you have it in front of you, so you can see what we anticipate both for out of district and some of the costs, as well as the BOAG magnet section. Okay, and you can see what those prices look like. But in the Connecticut districts and non-public schools, those are out-of-district placements, special programs to meet the needs of students that perhaps we can't meet in district. And going into next year, we have a net increase of 1, which is really why this tuition object is increased. Okay? So we do have a whole bunch decreasing, and funny enough, as you look at this, we spent more individual slides on all the increases to give you info. The object is decreasing. I'm going to talk about the non-certified salaries in particular, and then I kind of created a table for the rest of these, so we don't go through each individual one. So the next slide talks about our non-certified, and as you can see in yellow on our object page, it's decreasing 245, 481. And this is primarily due to the reductions that we're able to save related to Pearson and some competitive places where we can find efficiencies by closing Pearson, and it has to do in these non-certified areas. So there are 7 of those, and this is part of the reason, or the majority of the reason why this is a decrease at this point. These are the other major object decreases, so they're highlighted in yellow. And again, I don't have to go through all of them. We've talked about some of them when we talked about cost savings in Pearson, so I don't want to repeat some of what the board already knows, but it's a good synopsis. I do want to highlight two. One is the transportation athletics. We made it a point to really look at our athletic non-league travel and to try to be judicious about where it meant it was important to be able to allow our students to travel and where maybe we could make some non-league choices closer. In addition, we've kind of looked at ways that we can contain those costs, so there's a small savings there. And then our advertising and printing has been an area. This includes the reduction, about 11,000 of it is for the actual equipment that's at Pierson that we're not going to need to move. So the schools with the current equipment can manage it, and we lease our copier, so we don't need $11,000 worth of leasing. And then the other 23,000 is due to a bidding process where we went out to bid. And at this point, that looks like, we haven't awarded the bid completely, but that looks like the savings, another 23,000 in leasing and copy costs at the rest of our buildings. So a pretty significant savings based on really being aggressive as we came out of our last contract, where we contained costs and had savings. This is a new one that we're looking at, a significant amount. The instruction supplies really has a little bit to do with Pearson savings and a lot to do with our administrators and our other buildings. Although our students are moving into the other schools and there are some supplies that are increasing because our 5th grade will be at Elliott and our 4th grade at Joel, there's also some efficiency of scale, and our administrators really looked long and hard at each of those instructional supply pieces to make sure that it was something we needed and it was critical to support student learning. And so there is some additional savings there in the supplies instruction, and then fuel for meat is just what it says. It's the one line. So I did want to, at the end, kind of summarize, and we talked about this, I didn't talk about each piece tonight, but where our investments and adjustments are in our budget so that there would be a summary in your presentation. So if you look at the next 2 slides, it looks at our investments and highlights many of the things that we've discussed. I know we did discuss previously this new board certified behavior analyst position. That is one new position. And then the grade level leadership at Joel, we're back up to the top. That is something that I did make a small adjustment to after some conversation at our subcommittee meeting, but I did keep it in the budget in my recommendation, and it would represent at least the grade levels, so there would be a K, a 1, 2, 3, and 4 leadership person at those grade levels to support all the things we talked about, our new math and science curriculum implementation, facilitation of those meetings, and we have a full description of what that those positions look like. And I know we talked a lot about it at subcommittee. So I did make some adjustments. I did cut that number back, but I did keep it in there at this point in time. So I wanted you to be aware that my proposal includes that, and it's under the extracurricular stipends. Okay. Other investments, we talked briefly about the small amount for the maintenance ticketing software, the reallocation of resources, so it's a net increase in cost for talented and gifted, curriculum and the registration software that's on the sheet we talked about last week. And then the small pieces in athletics that aren't supported and currently in this budget. Okay, some adjustments. It's a place where we can kind of pull together the staffing reductions. Much of this relates to the closure of Pierson, where you saw a personnel line and a total number. Most of that is there, although we have 2 additional secondary classroom positions that in the restructure of the middle school, with the big class moving out, there were 2 additional positions in that restructure. So again, these are positions, not people. And depending on where we land with staff, there will be some conversations and things in terms of how this all plays out. So that represents staffing. We have operational savings at Pierson in particular, and then we mentioned photo tax costs. So we're back to kind of that summary page of where we stand right now. I'd like to take a second and make sure I acknowledge my team, because I couldn't do this without an amazing staff behind us, and my administrative team who works closely with their teachers and staff in the schools to really provide really thoughtful, I think, cost-centered budgets of what our kids need, that are innovative, that are aligned to our strategic plan, but very thoughtfully crafted. Our business office and central office staff, I think we drive them crazy as we get to this point to make sure that we're accurate and we have detail and backup for all of you and can answer questions. And then I can't do this work without the support of all of you. And this is difficult. We're beginning our journey and process, and I am here to kind of provide whatever you need, but I need to thank all of you for getting us to this point and where we are right now and the work that we still have to do. And so I'll kind of end with that in terms of questions, things to go back and reframe, or whatever we need to discuss.
All right, thank you. Okay, so now questions.
So the draft that we received last time, and then with the additional adjustments that we made, amounts to another additional cuts of $40,000.
Sure, let me tell you what those were. Okay, so one was the 2 of the team leaders. We have a team leader in related arts and in special ed at Joel. And so we cut back to really implement the specific grade level related to the curriculum. I would like to be able to expand that out at some point, but I felt after some discussion last week, that was kind of what is the real need. So we focused that a little bit, and so I took 2 of the stipends for next year to implement at least the grade level piece, so we have a key leader to address the implementation as a leadership team. So 2 of the team leader stipends at Joel.
I have a total of $25,804.
So those 2. And then in addition, I did remove the after-hours program that we were proposing as a possibility at Joel. So that was the other piece. I think that's about $11,000, which gets us close to 15. And then the other 23 is in the photocopy cost. I think it's 23. Does that get me there? Those are the major changes we made, and then there might be a few tweaks in line items that we saw. Maybe we reversed a number or whatever. But really the difference between last week and this week are the 2 stipends, the after-hours program, and the photocopying savings. Because those bids were analyzed on Friday. I can't remember now.
And then I believe in more than a flat $6,000 in each.
That's from the photocopy cost.
Okay.
That's the difference, yeah.
And then $3,000 in central office.
Yep, that's photocopy, because we didn't have as large a number.
Okay, thanks.
We're still looking at the medical insurance comes through that would be safe.
Yeah, we're,
So that
that's right, Tony.
The certified staff increase, that's not just contractual, but that's also because a number of teachers have increased their education.
Correct. So I did share
was
that
18
early
of
with
them?
you. There's,
Yeah.
I think there were 18, I think it may be in the questions, because
Yeah,
it
it
was
was.
a question you asked, Andy.
Yeah.
I think the total increase for teachers with advanced degrees, was a significant portion of that, with 18 people moving. So that did drive up the salary increase higher than just the normal contractual cost.
Okay, that was like 125.
Yes. 112.
Food costs like 17,000 and transport like that. Where is the gross?
I think it's been
It's not too- where's
I think it's, I'm pretty sure.
Where's Grove School?
Madison.
Oh, sorry.
I thought it was nice.
I thought you were saying
Grove,
it's right
I
on
think.
Topsy, isn't it? Isn't it on
Yeah, yeah.
So, so Catherine asked that question about some of the out-of-district transportation. Ultimately, Kelly works hard with local, regional coordinators where we have students going in the same direction or to the same programs. We'll coordinate and share the costs of bus. So some of that could be higher even, but because we're able to mitigate that. I think the other piece is Strive being here in Clinton. Definitely we benefit from that. We used to have to send kids to a different program. Strive is a collaborative with Guilford and Madison, right? That is our secondary transition, and that was something about 5 or 6 years ago. We helped get started here in Clinton so that it would be here for our kids, and it has definitely contained costs. One of the things on the out-of-district costs, I gave you the sheet and you can compare over time, but in 2010, the total out-of-district cost, pretty sure it's that year, I'll send it the exact, was about 1.4 million. And it has steadily come down with really thoughtful reorganization and planning, cost containment, development of quality programs both here, and like Strive is a good example of that. And then in the last 3 years, it started to move up again. And it truly is based on student need, what we can provide in district. I think we're providing amazing programming for students. We talked about that before in district. And then there are certain situations where if we cannot provide quality, free and appropriate public education to meet the students' needs, then we have to look at some specialized programs. So it really is thoughtful, and it needs to meet our needs as part of who we are. We have a moral and ethical and legal obligation to provide education to all of our Clinton residents.
What's the projected tuition for the, that we were just talking about? One of the lines is outplacement to public school district?
Correct.
I don't understand.
So so you can see that there's about a dozen students. So some of this is confidential, but also information that we need to share. So a lot of times we share some information, but not all, so that it's not specifically identifying. And then in certain cases, we may not know the exact program that the student will be going to yet. And so we've used that language too. But these all represent known students and the programming that we need to provide next year. So, we see this here because it is a big number and it's been something that we've shared, and you can get a feel for the cost of out-of-district placement. But then you look at the associated cost for in-district programming, and the programming costs are there, whether you're special ed, regular ed, or have other needs. And so really this is one part of a big budget. And while it is a big number, we get a lot of questions about it. I think it's one small piece of the large budget that meets the needs of all kids in Clinton. But if you have particular questions about it, we're happy to share what we can. But it really does help you look at what those tuition costs are and how we try to mitigate it. And you can see certain ones are less than others. It really depends on student need and program, and finding the most appropriate program to meet the needs of our students.
What's on homeless students?
So we are required by law.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are required by law that for students who may find themselves to be homeless, who may now be living out of town, to provide transportation for a period of time. So there's guidelines that do that, and so we've had to, in the last couple of years, actually provide transportation, and it's required us to have a line item so that we can do that. And there's, we have used that line item in the past 2 years that I've been here to provide transportation to kids that might find themselves in that situation. And there's a whole bunch of parameters around that, but yes, we do need to budget for that.
Is the idea with the homeless student transportation that someone who used to live in the town right now?
And became
Nice
homeless
to sell
while
in
in
While
town.
living in
So they
town.
still have, really it's to ensure access to education,
Right.
even if they find themselves.
But if someone's living, let's say they live with grandma in Madison. now,
Eventually,
if they lose
it's a
the
good
house.
question.
in
So
Brandon,
eventually, if they establish residency, there's guidelines around that in another district, then we may not have to provide that. But in that transition period, if someone is homeless, to allow that continuity for a student to have access to the school community and the school experience, we provide that.
Other questions, reactions? Again, for me, when I was going through this, I kind of looked at the numbers on one hand and the strategic plan on the other, and made sure, A, that we were being fiscally responsible, and B, that what we were thinking about, spending dollars for was reflective of our mission and what our community has said they want and need from the public schools. So it's not just arbitrary assignment of priorities, right?
And unfortunately, may not be indicative of where we end up.
Mike, what do you think at this juncture?
Just wait to see what they have here.
I think
We
we
have
all
some work
are.
to do there, yes, but we're
Yeah,
hopeful. I think it'll benefit.
I think it's a solid move for a whole lot of reasons. Kevin?
Surprised how much some things do cost, but it seems like as much you can think about a lot of that stuff.
Kevin? Okay. Lois?
Yeah, my questions have been answered in this.
Yeah, no, I mean, this isn't the first time we're seeing
Not
this,
first
so,
time,
you
right,
know,
right.
it's not, this isn't really new information aside from the adjustments that you made since last week, based on our discussion. You know. Not much you can do when staff educates themselves to a further degree, which is what you want.
So exactly what we want.
That's $112,000 on top of your just actual contractual obligation. That's kind of a big number in the grand scheme of things.
If you look at the strategic plan and you look at the surveys, one of the most important things is high quality staff, both, from all of our stakeholders. And it is, and we have high quality staff in the team, but it's a structure of the contract and their desire to improve and what they can bring to kids in the classroom, and I love that. It does have impact, on the budget, but I think it's a good budget.
And the curriculum inflation too, even though it's kind of a small number, but it is a big number. I was talking to one of the pilot teachers and can't say enough great things about Bridges and how much she's seeing improvement.
Right.
So we're utilizing a person, staff member we hired last year, more appropriately by expanded, and utilizing his expertise, so that's important.
seems to me that we're doing everything right.
I'm always thinking, I know I say this all the time, but I'm not always just thinking of this year, but I'm thinking about 3 years out, 5 years out, and I feel like much of the work we've done, many of the discussions we've had surrounding this year's budget really kind of not only play out nicely for this year, but for the future. Well, we're gonna, you know, have some things in a good place where I think we want to be. Okay, then I think what I would like to do, if nobody else has anything further tonight, now obviously this is a great deal of information, many numbers, you know, about that kind of thing. Obviously, we will vote on this budget next Monday, February 4th. That's right. So what I would like to ask is to keep to our current practice, which is that any, you know, questions that come up between now and then, let Maryann and I know so that I can make sure that we can make sure the entire board has the same information. And then we will make a decision next week. All right? Thank you all.
I just want to say too, with the information that I have provided in responses to questions, if they didn't truly answer what you were looking for, please, you know, make sure you follow up. We have lots of backup.
And please too, I mean, obviously, Mike, your point is very well taken about the health. I mean, I think we all feel that way, but if there's other things as you're kind of digesting this that you're like, I'll just, please let us know that as well, so that we can do the work that we need to do, present you the budget that reflects your priorities as well, next week.
Do you have the percentage of like how much the debt service and like operating, like other capital one's gonna add on?
So I did include on the question sheet, I think there's some tentative information of what I know. It's on the back, there's a little table. So we've been given a debt reduction anticipated number, but I've also been told that that may change as, you know, the finance department in town looks at how they are managing the debt. And so we have a tentative number that I provided to you, but it's not definite. And then our capital right now is at 629. That was presented, and that's going to go through the process on the town side, so it's accepted by CEC. So we have those increases, and then this one at this point, but it usually does change a little bit. Those two pieces, capital and debt, are really kind of now town-driven. So we'll have to wait and see what those numbers end up being.
Anything else?
And I can send that to you electronically.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your hard work and your diligence and your, this is a challenge. And can I take a motion to adjourn? All in favor? We are adjourned.
This video provided as a public service by Kirk Carr, the Kirkster. Thank you for watching.